American author Sarah Orne Jewett's The Country of the Pointed Firs includes a detailed description of landscape. I will be reading selected passages from the 1995 edition of Jewett's original 1896 work, edited by Allison Easton. I hope you will see how her fictional landscape closely imitates her real landscape of South Berwick, Maine, and is central in the telling of this uniquely American tale. Enjoy this reading of The Country of the Pointed Firs. Chapter 7. The Outer Islands. We were standing where there was a fine view of the harbor and its long stretches of shore, all covered by the great army of the pointed firs, darkly cloaked and standing as if they waited to embark. As we looked far seaward among the outer islands, the trees seemed to march seaward still, going steadily over the heights and down to the water's edge. It had been growing gray and cloudy, like the first evening of autumn, and a shadow had fallen on the darkening shore. Suddenly, as we looked, a gleam of golden sunshine struck the outer islands, and one of them shone out clear in the light, and revealed itself in a compelling way to our eyes. Mrs. Todd was looking off across the bay, with a face full of affection and interest. The sunburst upon that outermost island made it seem like a sudden revelation of the world beyond this, which some believed to be so near. "That's where Mother lives," said Mrs. Todd. "Can't we see it plain? I was brought up out there on Green Island. I know every rock and bush on it." Chapter 8. Green Island. The house was just before us now, on a green level that looked as if a huge hand had scooped it out of the long green field we had been ascending. A little way above, the dark spruce woods began to climb the top of the hill, and cover the seaward slopes of the island. There was just room for the small farm and the forest. We looked down at the fish house, and its rough sheds, and the weirs stretching far out into the water. As we looked upward, the tops of the firs came sharp against the blue sky. There was a stretch of rough pasture land round the shoulder of the island, to the eastward, and here were all the thick scattered gray rocks that kept their places, and the gray backs of many sheep that forever wandered and fed on the thin sweet pasturage that fringed the ledges, and made soft hollows and strips of green turf like growing velvet. I could see the rich green of bayberry bushes, here and there, where the rocks made room. The air was very sweet. One could not help wishing to be a citizen of such a complete and tiny continent and fragrant home of fisherfolk. Chapter 9. William. We went from the upper edge of the field above the house into a smooth brown path among the dark spruces. The hot sun brought out the fragrance of the pitchy bark, and the shade was pleasant as we climbed the hill. Chapter 13. Poor Joanna. There was a good many old friends had Joanna on their minds. After the first year or two, Joanna was more and more forgotten as an everyday charge. "Folks lived very simple in those days, you know," she continued, as Mrs. Fosdick's knitting was taking much thought at the moment. I expect there was always plenty of driftwood thrown up, and a poor fallen patch of spruces covered all the north side of the island, so she always had something to burn. She was very fond of workin' in the garden ashore, and that first summer she began to till the little field out there, and raised a nice parcel of potatoes. She could fish, of course, and there was all her clams and lobsters. You can always live well in any wild place by the sea, when you'd starve to death up country, except 'twas berry time. Joanna had berries out there, blackberries at least, and there was a few herbs in case she needed them, mullein in great quantities, and a plant of wormwood I remember seeing once when I stayed there, long before she fled out to Shellheap. Yes, I recall the wormwood, which is always a planted herb, so there must have been folks there before the Todd's day. A growin' bush makes the best gravestone. I expect that wormwood always stood for somebody's solemn monument. Catnip, too, is a very enduring herb, about an old place. Chapter 21. The Backward View. There was still an hour to wait, and I went up to the hill just above the schoolhouse, and sat there thinking of things and looking off to sea, and watching for the boat to come in sight. I could see Green Island, small and darkly wooded at that distance. Below me were the houses of the village, with their apple trees and bits of garden ground. Presently, as I looked at the pastures beyond, I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Todd herself, walking slowly in the path that led along, following the shore toward the port. At such a distance one can feel the large, positive qualities that control a character. Close at hand, Mrs. Todd seemed able and warm-hearted, and quite absorbed in her bustling industries, but her distant figure looked mateless and appealing, with something about it that was strangely self-possessed and mysterious. Now and then she stooped to pick something. It might have been her favorite pennyroyal, and at last I lost sight of her as she slowly crossed an open space on one of the higher points of land, and disappeared again behind a dark clump of juniper and pointed firs. As I came away on the little coastwise steamer, there was an old sea running, which made the surf leap on all the rocky shores. I stood on deck, looking back, and watched the busy gulls agree and turn, and sway together down the slopes of air, then separate hastily and plunge into the waves.